Hey everyone, and welcome back to another process walkthrough video. So this is the third video in this month's set, and this will be the piece that we're taking a look at. So up from the previous piece where the characters were kind of putting on their clothes, this is where they are right about to head out. So this is one of the scenes that was really difficult to kind of exactly figure out how I wanted to do it, mainly because of me wanting to show a bit more of the character's kind of hideout, show a bit more of the lighting and the complexity in the environment. But at the same time, this need also ran into conflict with the scene not progressing that much, right? Because if we take a look back at scene 1 where the characters are doing this, and scene 2 there's a natural progression, but to scene 3, not too much has changed, which is one of the things that I'm not too completely satisfied with this particular piece. However, there's still plenty of things to take a look at, plenty of things to break down. So yeah, let's head right into it. So here, as you can see in the very first piece, immediately you will tell that, well, things are pretty different because, well, there's only a single frame, or excuse me, rather half the frame, right? It's a vertical composition and it feels really cramped. Now, this thing wasn't particularly obvious to me at first because I thought this could be one of those very, smartly composed, portrait-oriented compositions that can work really well. However, the issue was that it was kind of cramped and difficult to figure out the perspective from this particular angle. And here is one of the issues that we face off immediately, right? For example, in this particular piece, I actually managed to find reference for these poses, which came in really helpful. However, reference, once again, isn't, the cure-all for everything, because reference, especially when you're drawing two characters at the same time, means that unless your reference has these two characters doing the exact same thing from the exact angle you want, and perhaps some people can have the luxury of shooting these sort of very advanced references with their own camera. The rest of us have to settle with essentially understanding the reference material we have and then extracting the information from that to make use of in our own artworks. So for this particular piece, the difficulty on a lot of the difficulty was really in getting the characters to sort of fit into the same frame, because I had a frame where we had a foreground character kind of being seen from a slightly higher than average, is that the right word? Or higher than head and eye level kind of angle, right? Or camera position. So standalone, this character works fine. Similar for this character in the background, where I also had a reference. As always, reference is very important, it's very helpful. However, in this case, the reference for our background character is seen from a lot further away, and maybe not from such a high angle. Now, that's going to create issues because these two characters, if we're just going to take from the reference directly, don't fit in the same frame. So initially, right, obviously my first attempt, as always, is to just put what I want in the scene and try to figure things out from there. Here, I quickly figured out that, well, the perspective issue was going to be one thing that I needed to work on immediately. So before that, I decided to say, okay, so this scene is going to be really complicated. This scene is going to be challenging. This scene is going to be a mess in a way that we're working with a very narrow composition. We're also dealing with perspective difficulty. So going into this, I knew that this would be a pretty tough piece to work out. So before committing to this, because I was half a mind of basically, kind of bailing out on this composition altogether and crossing it out and starting a new one, I decided, okay, let's just give it a try. What if we throw in some color? Does that work well? And honestly, I really like how the colors turned out. I like the combination between the warmth of the sunlight and the sort of cool tint in the shadows, and I thought that was really interesting. Of course, right at this point in time, because I was sketching all four pieces together, so when this piece was in this stage, the previous piece was, well, it was in this particular stage. So a lot of things were not yet locked down, and that could be one issue that I might have to resolve in the future, because everything's kind of in flux. How do you know which one kind of leads the pack, right? For example, I find a good lighting from this piece. How am I going to translate it to here? Or rather, if I'm exploring this particular experimental composition, should I carry over the same experiment to this piece? And if I do, and it doesn't work as well, what do I do? Do I change this or do I change this? So it's a difficult thing to have to contend with, but actually I found that it was really helpful to help me improve my decision making. Improve my decision making and help me really practice how to think hard on which kind of lighting works and why they work. So here, the reason why I find this particular lighting is good is because we have a good arrangement of the characters in foreground and background, even though the perspective isn't quite in place exactly. If you look at a thumbnail, I think it illustrates my case a lot better, right? We have the characters clearly in different positions in the frame, the proportions are different enough, and the surrounding, although small and relatively simple, supports the idea that these characters are kind of, once again, one in front of the other, and it suggests an amount of depth and camera closeness in the scene, which is, well, what I want. So after creating this color sketch, I decided, okay, let's go for it, right? Like in my mind, I kind of approved this, and it's like, it's not too bad. What could go wrong? And honestly, I think the final result is, well, decent enough. However, this isn't quite the end of the challenge yet. So as with before, we have to kind of look at the composition and think, okay, so if this is its current state, how do we improve it? And the idea here was that I wanted to try expanding out the canvas or expanding out the frame. And that was one thing that both became a curse and a blessing. In terms of a curse, well, naturally, it gave me a lot more to draw, a lot more to manage. Suddenly, this small little slice here, because of the expanding of the frame, I wanted to spread out the characters a little bit more. It became a massive slice here of the background. A huge area here, and here that we have to account for, as well as this giant area over here. Now, because at this point in time, right, I've developed this particular sketch a bit further. This is the previous frame. I also found out that, okay, we're going with a brighter sort of lighting setup. We're going with a scene that is more well lit. Now, what that is going to mean is that these orange areas need to be kind of well lit, right? I can't get away with it being in this color scheme where everything's in shadow, only the small areas here are bright. So this was kind of a deliberate challenge in a way it does make the composition worse, in a sense that I'm not quite as proficient in this new challenging setup, which I deliberately chose. And so now all these orange areas need to be kind of drawn with lighting in mind, with a little bit of detail in mind, and that's going to be something that haunts me for this piece. Now, obviously, on the blessing side of things, it's not all doom and gloom. Well, the good thing is that, well, we get to show more of the environment, we get to show more of the scene, and we get to, well, just kind of immerse improve the viewing experience in terms of immersion. So I think that is really, really good. Well, however, the challenge is about to begin. So let's take a look at what happens next. So one of the things that I just spoke about in the first video is that tiles and other regular patterns are always good, right? You have things like blinds, which are regular shapes. We have floor tiles, in terms of wooden tiles, wooden planks, small ceramic tiles. All these things are really, really great for holding down perspective. If you have like a rough and tumble scene here where everything is just rough and it works in the thumbnail but doesn't work when you look at it close up, it's extremely daunting. The feeling of looking at this and then, man, that is just rough. And I don't mean to sound too much of a doom and gloom kind of mood here, but in reality, I just want to kind of be realistic with you guys. Sometimes when it's a tough drawing, the morale definitely takes a hit. But with practice and with some further understanding and learning, one thing I did learn and appreciate is these kind of fixed textures, right? If you have a perspective grid that's set up, throwing in these fixed planks and fixed features on the ground and on the walls, they are really going to be super, super efficient in helping you start to set up the scene. Because this is basically a lot of free detail that you get to put in the scene without having to, measure every single bit of it, the perspective on this line, the perspective on this line. Nope, all you need is to understand a perspective of your, here in our case, apartment building, excuse me, And then what we need to do is to transform a flat orthogonal view, or rather straight on view of the floorboards, and then we've got it. It's pretty simple, pretty good. So this is, once again, the power of floor tiles and so on. So something unique to this particular piece is that there's going to be a mix of silhouetting and non-silhouetting, which is a challenge that I think is pretty interesting. So in terms of silhouetting, we have the character here, which is obviously, right, is a silhouette, right? There's going to be a background light is going to come in. She's going to be in the foreground, which is darker, and so on and so forth. That's the easy to understand part of things. So the difficult part, or the harder and more difficult to manage part for me, is this character in the foreground. So she's not silhouetted pretty much in any way, right, other than by her hair and her coat, just a little bit. However, in terms of the background, her immediate adjacent background on canvas is also pretty dark, leaving only this small area here to kind of act as a silhouette. So the thing about silhouettes is that it gives you a really, really clean definition between two areas. So we have a really strong light and shadow relationship between, like, for example, this area and this area, right? It's a really strong relationship. The problem with the lack of silhouetting effect is that you still have this area, but it kind of blends in with this area. And the problem with that is that when it happens on the main character or main focal point of the drawing, there is a potential for it to go wrong. And it goes wrong in a way because, well, now you're in a situation where your main character's lighting is looking kind of dull, it's not very well defined, and you don't really have much to kind of compensate for it. And that could be an issue, right? Because if you have a very interesting and in-depth, very detailed character design, like a fantasy character, you can take the opportunity to make use of the quieter lighting to do a lot of design work, to do a lot of expressive detailing, all that kind of stuff can compensate. But in this case, because our character's design is more simple, we have to think of some other way to introduce a bit more lighting to the character rather than just sit here in a half silhouette, which is just awkward, right? It's really just not good. So for this particular piece, I decided, okay, so we're gonna have a light coming from here. It's gonna be pretty strong. Maybe we can have a light coming from here behind the character as well, right? From below, because she's standing in front of the front door. Maybe we can have a little bit of light coming from this angle. So this was the initial concept, initial idea. And at the same time, right, the same difficulties also apply to the shelves. So we have these shelves over here, which are in shadow once again, but again, right, based on this particular piece, we've noticed that, okay, they need a bit of lighting. And so here's my initial drafting in of that particular lighting, which is in terms of these gray little pieces of color. Now, these little pieces are extremely crucial to the piece at this stage, to the composition at this stage, because they indicate the presence of light from this direction, right? Let me use a brighter color. From this direction, right? There's a bluish light from outside, from the sky, that's bouncing around behind this character's head in the room that eventually comes here. Now, what this does is to help us expand the space behind the character's head, and kind of makes it open that way, right? This piece of information here gives us a lot of information here. It kind of compensates for the fact that the scene is feeling claustrophobic, and it does this in a kind of logical way, right? Simply show that there's light coming in from elsewhere, and suddenly the scene feels more open as you want, as well, or rather as I had wanted. So moving on from here is where, well, our difficulties continue. Once again, as I mentioned in the previous video, drawing in the details is difficult. And once again, right, having the reference here helps a lot. It tells us where the folds are, how to kind of approach the character in each way. And it also gives us a chance to spend a bit more time just chilling out, drawing in the details. And the difficult part here is to maintain the sort of perspective relationship, the proportions, and all that good stuff while you're drawing this. So this was the particular challenge at this phase, and to be honest, by this point I was actually pretty relieved, right? I had managed to expand the scene to its current state without too much trouble, and we found a lighting scheme, or rather we have started to latch onto a lighting scheme that works well and also corroborates with the previous piece. So here a lot of my energies was basically going to continuously adding, you know, these very, very helpful little bits of toweling on the wall, these regular patterns, the kind of air slits in the cabinets. Really just anything with patterns really helps, because if you look at your own place in real life, there are lots of little things with patterns in your own room. Like just take a look around you. If I take a look around myself, I see a set of 4 drawers. To my left, I see a row of books to my left. I see a shelf to my left. I see my bigger cabinet with like 3 big windows. All these things are even parallel shapes that are easy to kind of identify and place onto the scene, that enhances the perspective by quite a lot. So I'll definitely encourage you guys to adopt this one, right? Like, this is one thing that I always have to repeat because it's just that important. So one more specific thing to this particular piece is how I wanted to handle the outside of the apartment. So the outside of the apartment here is kind of a difficult question, because with the light coming in from essentially above, right, it's coming in from above, but it's not coming in straight into our eyeballs. So we can't just have this thing be super bright, but we also can't have it be too dark, right? Because once again, this is the direction the light is coming from. It's morning, you know, there's a bit of fog in the air, it's atmospheric. We want the general area here to be bright and also to silhouette our character. And so here I finally settled on having this light blue tint, bluish gray, with a bit of yellow, with a bit of warmth. And this warmth essentially representing the apartments below, or excuse me, this warmth here, where does it come from? Because the light is coming from behind this particular apartment, right? This particular apartment belongs maybe like 100 meters away, 50 meters away, and the light is coming from behind that towards us. So why is there warmth here? Now that is a good question, and the reason, or rather my answer is, there is warmth here because the apartments and the building above our characters here are receiving the sunlight. Recall the sunlight is coming from over there. For example, let me just illustrate it here. Our characters are here, right? Our character's building is here, and this building is here, and the sunlight is coming in this way, right? And we see this segment of this building, this floor of this building. So this building here is mostly going to be bluish because it does not receive the light. However, the bounce light that hits the rest of this red building bounces here. And so I left in a little bit of warm tones on near the top, where, you know, this area will be in shadow, right? This area will be in the top, and so this is where the bounce light is going to come from. So yeah, to explain the background, which is surprisingly difficult for me in this piece actually. And otherwise, this phase really just marks the beginning of detailing, right? Figuring out where to put where, what to put where, excuse me, and, you know, how to arrange it, what kind of colors you want to use, and all the difficulties that come with that. And in the next frame is where, once again, right, we have to make some changes in terms of the brightness of the environment, because at this stage, I believe I'm pretty close to finishing this piece. I was around here or so, and I know that I wanted the lighting to be pretty bright. And so here we started to kind of accommodate them by, as always, adding in a rough representation of what we want. For example, the light hitting this area, the light spilling into the drawers here, or the shoe racks here, with a bounce light coming up here. And we have the outside light kind of spilling in. So all these things are elements that can open and expand the environment. And these are all super helpful for us because they are reasonably easy to add, and in addition they also add a little bit to the silhouette of our character here, right? As you can see, with a bit more distinction from the character's back to the wall. And as a whole, right, this was basically a good lesson for me as well, because sometimes when you feel the environment is too claustrophobic, it may not always be because of the physical constraints. Like, for example, the corridor is too narrow, right? You might think. But sometimes it could just be the amount of lighting that a character or the scene is or is not receiving that could create that unintended effect. And here in the scene is where I kind of remedy that and adjust it towards a more bright and open space. Now, to finish off is where we continue to work on the previous line of thought and just continue with where we left off, right? Introducing a bit more warmth to this area where the sunlight is really where the sunlight here is getting a bit heavier. This is where we introduce a bit more warmth, a lot of bounce lights here, But overall, maintaining the presence of the cool light from outside, and yeah, a lot of sharpening up to do in all these little details, and just having fun. By this stage, things are coming into place, and I was confident that I could probably finish this piece without too many more difficulties. And yeah, this is pretty much it for this particular piece. As always, questions are very much welcome in the comments, specific parts of the drawing that perhaps you want to understand a bit more of. Feel free to let me know in the comments as always. Otherwise, yeah, this will be it for this particular video, and keep an eye out for the final process video for the final piece of this month's set. And yeah, see you soon.